Oh, there's nothing better than a Zoom jazz hands, snap, kind of, dancing in your seat situation. Hey, good morning to some familiar faces and to some very new faces. I am joining you here on Larrakia country, which is in Darwin, and I usually live and work on Wurundjeri land. So I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging of both of those communities and, of course, of the lands in which you are joining from and learning from today. Now, I guess it's all good and well for a bio to be read, but essentially I'm just a kid who loves her job and loves hanging out with people and people's dogs. And so any time or any way that I can be able to invite, I suppose, the learning and the presence along is my best day ever. Now, I was taking a couple of notes during that morning session there, and what I found is that the majority of people's best day ever had something to do with travel, something to do with family. In fact, only 2 of you attributed something to do with learning. And nobody said it was the finance committee meeting last Friday. Blew my mind. And as a designer or somebody that works in learning design, I got to thinking, why do meetings suck so much and we tolerate it? And I think it is because we just don't use design principles. Now, I know that it's early in the morning, but the teacher in me wants you to have a little bit of a go at activating your mind. So before I kick off into some of my tips, tricks, stories, and asks of all of you very, very creative people, I'd love you to join me on something called a Padlet. Now, the teachers in the room will be incredibly familiar with this. This is basically a nice little room that we go into, and it can have information. It can have lots of pictures. As you will see, it looks something like this. There are around 67 little pictures on there, and your first design brief is on there as well. You have 3 minutes to select 2 of those cards. So just write down which number they are. And if you're so inclined and the coffee has kicked in, feel free to like that. Feel free to add a little comment on that. Maybe you might even like to write a little characterization. Basically, you're selecting 2 cards that really speak to you, something that either maybe speaks to your identity, something that speaks to your passions or interests. Maybe it is aspirational. You're just drawn to it for no particular reason. But 2020 is very, very glad that the QR codes made a little bit of a comeback. I am going to give you around a minute just to have a look at that Padlet. So for those who are following along at home, you are absolutely free and welcome to also gather in this. This Padlet will be open forever. So please feel free to have a little bit of a go at this and share your identity as well. Oof, there we go. There's how we get online to that. Just as we thought the QR code was dead, along came 2020. So what I can see here are folks who are liking, who are saying, I really identify with this card because it makes me feel happy. I can see colors changing here. Beautiful. Now, I encourage you to keep this up alongside this talk as well, as you can continue to explore something on a little bit of a sidecar. All right. So now with one of those cards that you have selected, I'm going to give you a little bit of a challenge, maybe your second design brief here. And as a designer, we know that we have not enough time so that we don't overthink things and we kick into action. Very much what we need to do in our meetings. There's too much talk. We need to get action orientated. All right, so what I would like you to do is take on the identity of one of those cards and make it silently obvious to everyone else. So a few things you might like to do is change your name. Maybe you can change your background. Perhaps you might like to get a little bit of a symbol of that. But see if you can start to tick into, rather than you just being on the screen here, can you take the identity of one of those cards that you selected and silently make it obvious to everybody else? All right, I am going to kick on in. Now, across 2020, meetings and events looked quite different. But before that, we started to see that, in fact, it was more efficient for us to be working from home anyway. One of the things that we did see was introduced into a family, somebody who was very well esteemed, and he said this in relation to online meetings, that this is the end of my career. Rob Kelly is the guy who was gate crashed by his kids during a BBC live interview. It was one of those things that went viral, and a lot of people were questioning so much about his family, but he was questioning so much about, would this be the most career limiting thing that could possibly happen to him? We'd never really seen this before. And in fact, it was always assumed that everything would be quite sanitized and quite tidy. In fact, you wouldn't have your real world behind you, right? You wouldn't ever have your ironing board getting ready for the next part of your day, maybe your breakfast sitting there as well. What 2020 has shown us is that our whole way that we show up is quite different. Rod Ponton, a lawyer from Texas in the United States, a clever, learned man, I doubt very much would have thought that this would be the quote of his life. Rod Ponton is, in fact, not a cat. He is, though, a victim of all of these sorts of technology that were thrown and thrust upon us and that we had to make sense of. My land is school land. So it came from us being in a classroom and probably actually enjoying the fact that we could pretend to be a cat, to now saying, oh my gosh, I don't know how to not be a cat. But what it did sort of alert us to is it brings out that vulnerability in all of us. And what it was up to us to do was to either accept or judge. Lizette Ocampo famously said long before the I'm not a cat is that I am not a potato. But in fact, she was a potato, and she was managing a whole team who realized very quickly that this was probably one of those moments of you had to be there. Now, Lizette, unlike our lawyer in Texas, was able to figure out that she had a filter on, but she chose to keep that filter on for the next 10 minutes or so because she could see how much joy and jovial connections it was bringing to her team. And in fact, it turned out to be a real turning point in how they were connecting together as they started to let down their guard. And then, of course, there's Chi-Chi, just earlier this morning, who said, I am not Dan Ryan. Chi-Chi was on our chair, and actually all of us were just laughing, calling out to Chi-Chi, 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 as Chi-Chi was turning. What is happening here? And here's the thing. You might not be a cat. You might not be a potato. You might not be Dan Ryan Chi-Chi, but in fact you are. And I'm not saying that in terms of, oh my gosh, that's your identity and now everybody's laughing at you. But it's just saying in that moment, I brought my whole self to the table here. There's a couple of key things that I have learned from being a learning designer and an event designer as well, that learning and gathering to learn should bring joy, but somehow we actively take the joy out. If you want to turn up as a cat and the smartest lawyer in the state, turn up as a cat and the smartest lawyer in the state. But somewhere along the line, somewhere said, no, you must be in a tie. You must have a sanitized background. And for goodness sakes, don't let all of the things that are involved in the best day of your life, like family and like friends, get in the way of your everyday. When you start to say it like that, it makes absolutely no sense. The second thing that I wanted to share around this is a bit of a personal story. So when you asked me what was the best day of my life, it was this. I was lining up in a huge conference center in San Diego in California, and it was 2012. For the longest time as a baby teacher, I wanted to attend a conference called ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education, because I heard that it had something like 20,000 educators that would be there at once. And I thought, if I want to become a great teacher, I need to run into some of these really great, clever people. So this is uppity thousand of them, making it into a room to watch Sir Ken Robinson, the late Sir Ken Robinson, speak. And I remember taking this photo thinking, this is the best day of my life. None of my friends or family were there, but it was in this thrill of anticipation of what I might learn and who I might meet. And I know this photo is probably triggering for most people around the world, because the reality is we probably won't meet like this again for a really, really long time. But that's where I thought, this is joyful learning. This has hope and anticipation into it. What has been neglected and makes me a little bit sad when I look back on that photo is that sort of experiential character of learning spaces. They packed that tightly on purpose. They wanted this sense of you might not make it into the room and that you've got to hustle. When we walked into the room, there were smoke machines and there was music. How might we create that in spaces, particularly that are online? We had this challenge through 2020 with our young people. Zoom was meant to just be a bit of a update platform, almost like a pretty poor surrogate for face-to-face connections. But in fact, it became our whole connections. And some of the first people to hack it deliberately, of course, were our students, where they were inviting their friends into the room. They started putting up great backgrounds. They taught us how to hack this technology. People like cats and potatoes came along by accident. We started to see some pretty amazing things happening. This is Vance Joy, who really hacked this sort of Brady Bunch style system to invite also other people in who were fans and who could play instruments for a really great crowdsourced event of Lay It All On Me Now. And I remember mid-lockdown watching this on TV thinking, haha, that is what a Zoom call should look like, sound like, and feel like. Not necessarily having paid actors everywhere, but why can't it be like a big old brain jam? We have lots of capacity to do this for some reason when it's all about us gathering socially. But when we are gathering in a professional sense, there's somehow that we lose all of this. So it became my mission to be more Vans. And as I was hosting an event for about 800 young people across New South Wales, we had intermittent dance parties. We had costume changes. We sent them all secret packages, secret challenges that they had to play out for each other. So we can see the Dudley Dynamites there. They kicked off a dance party while you've got some other students thinking, what is going on? And just following along with that. We had feedback to say the face-to-face event that had so much great surprise in there, structured in there, that was mirrored in our online. Our kids had the best time ever, and we learned how to connect when we weren't face-to-face. What I decided to do is say, well, what does this look like intentionally? Let's take the accidental out of it. Let's have a look at the ludic. So the ludic is the playful, spontaneous, sometimes ironic, absurd experiences or narratives. You can probably see, if you've got your little gallery view on, there's a couple of plants that have joined us today. There was a couple of sessions where I made the whole room plants, and as people came in, it felt like they were walking through a garden. These are simple things that create networks, that they create stories, and they create narratives that are unexpected. When we can start to sew the ludic in, it actually activates something in our brain that makes us deeply notice. It actually makes us deeply connect with what might be going on the screen. So very quickly, if we can put the ridiculous and absurd in there, it's not to say, I'm biting my thumb at how serious this conversation or this meeting might be. There's actually something cognitively that triggers us to start to need to make those connections as we expect the unexpected. So we need to have a look at this concept of some things making no sense at all and how we resolve uncertainty. So you've all been in those situations where you think, I don't really know what's going on here. And it triggers some sort of responses, often a flight response. The good thing about being online is that we're adults, and we can also invite our young people to opt out or to lean in. So while this that sense of that I'm not safe because I'm not in a space that I'm familiar with all these people, usually we're sitting here in our PJs and our fluffy slippers, so that sense of safety is there, that sense of I can switch off the camera is there, and that invitation to pay more attention through crazy things happening also is there. So here's the thing around divergence. Differing from each other or from a particular standard. This is the sort of invitation that we have right now in terms of making meetings suck less. Looking at the status quo of how they should be, looking at what we think that they might be, and then choosing to turn up for our colleagues, for our leaders, for each other in a way that might spark some absurdity and make those connections deeper as well. There's nothing better than the magic of a shared experience. For some reason, we decided in 2020 we'd put pause on shared experience and wait until we could get face to face. I'm going to challenge that. I think that a very divergent way of us going forward here is to accept that invitation to invite all of the things that make our best day ever our best day ever. Sitting in PJs, going out into nature, hanging out with the people that we love, inviting them into the room as well. In fact, bringing our whole selves. So a couple of ways that I've done this, not just online, but also offline as well. This was the last time I ever collected my name badge from a conference, because this was that same conference that I'd flown halfway across the world for. They gave me a pack full of crap that I didn't want and spelt my name wrong on my name tag. And I thought that's time better spent hanging out with other people. So this was the very last moment in time that this event organizer ever made anybody wear a name tag that they didn't write themselves. Because I choose to be bothered by how people feel when they show up to learn. And I was bothered by the fact that I'd flown halfway around the world and someone couldn't even get my name right. And in fact, I had to line up for 45 minutes in order to find that out. And that for me was unacceptable. It's funny when we talk about these unexpected experiences, because I'm guessing a whole bunch of you turned up thinking there was some secret sauce to unlocking the learning. I actually made my name in the education event space by taking that one experience and tinkering with what the registration process of events might look like. That was my one creative bag. One day I thought, I don't want to be printing out people's name tags. People can call themselves whatever they want. And so let's try this really differently. What people had to do was walk through a photo booth, get a nice sheet of paper, write their own name, write their own lanyard, grab a coffee, and stick that up. And I called this the collective genius wall. It meant that I could go over there at any time and call upon people in the audience. Contact cards were there. It looks pretty simple now, but back in 2015, we had to almost massage people out of wanting to line up to get their lanyard. It was one of those things that deeply personalized an experience as well. And it came from a personal experience of, I never want that to happen again with anyone else. So it was quite interesting. I thought that this was for my radical out there conference, but it wasn't until a government agency said, we heard about what you do with when people show up and their very first experience. Can you design something for us? And you know what I did? I didn't say, yeah, sure. Immediately I thought, but everybody will have to wear a blazer and everybody will have to be checked in, right? And it wasn't until I asked the question of, do you care who shows up? And they said, we care deeply, but do we care about ticking them off a page? No. So find a more creative way to do that. I've then started to tinker with other ways we can bring clever people together. Things like, I know that's triggering again, right? Like a whole food, wash your hands. I can't even look at that without feeling a little bit triggered. But, telling people that you can eat whenever you want. You can drink as much as you want. You are clever adults. You are here for a shared purpose. So get on with it. And it doesn't have to be structured. In fact, any of my conferences don't start with a keynote. Keynote might be over lunch. It might just be someone that's respected. But I refuse to let others dictate how we're going to think as we go forward. The biggest thing that you get when you start at a conference of Eventful is the how. So we design great learning. It's that simple. We design crazy experiences that are unexpected. We put a little bit of absurdity into everything that we do. And these are our design principles, that we think that great events, meetings, gatherings, experiences, basically anyone who shows up to learn, it should be personal and personalized, should be creative and connected, and have a little bit of pink too. You might have a look around your gallery screen here and you can see that our Creative Mornings Melbourne folks, I gave them the brief of maybe we can all wear a little bit of pink and maybe people might notice. There's pink in lipstick, there's pink in water bottles, maybe you're wearing a giant pink jacket like this. These are the sorts of nice little rites and rituals that you can start to bring in. Give some of your meeting participants different briefs here. I gave you a brief as to how you might embed your nice little identity from the identity cards into what you're doing here. I can see that some of you have done that as well. Thinking about this now, how might you go into your next meeting, either as a participant or a leader, and think, how might I make people take this personally? How can I make it personal for those people and personalize the experience for us as a group? How can I bring a little bit of absurdity and creativity in there, the unexpected? And importantly, how might this experience be a connected one as well? So even with that whole idea of, I'm not a potato, you can see that that was a personalized shared experience for that group, that whole, oh my gosh, you had to be in the room. It was creative because it was utilizing the resources that were available. We want to make that less accidental and more design and on purpose, but by utilizing a Zoom filter, it just made everybody go, oh my goodness, this was so unexpected. And connected in the way of it actually was a story that could go beyond that group too. It connected the group in a little deeper to each other and probably to that purpose around why they were together. The big thing here that I would love to finish up on so that we have more time to explore those identities, we have more time for a little bit of a chat and a Q&A, is that we have been invited. It's not that we had to tolerate now everything going online. We have absolutely been invited here to have a very divergent experience. And if I can go back to Rob Kelly, whose family famously, way before COVID was a thing, gate crashed his very important meeting on what was happening in Korea. He's actually said now, it's nice to think that we made people happy. So much media attention came to him. And did he lose his career? In fact, the very opposite. He was now asked what else might he be able to commentate on. And I love that he became a bit of a social media icon when we all went into lockdown and realized that actually all of us are Rob Kelly now, the most famous working from home family on the planet, now live talking about how great that is. And as you can see, Rob's daughter there turning up and bringing her whole self. I'm sure that if we asked Rob those same questions of what's the best day of your life, it would probably include his great family that we could see there. And he's one of the lucky ones that the world has invited to bring his family into his work life as well. I'm giving you that invitation, and I sure hope that you take that up as well. Because for some, and I'm going to say most of us, the most divergent act is accepting the invitation to show up as we are, where we are. Maybe you're in a hotel room in Darwin with no really cool backdrops and thinking, I better move this before the meeting, and then thinking, well, actually, that's not being authentic. Well, I don't have kids or dogs running around. I sure do have my real life in the background. And hopefully this really invites some of you to say, you know what, I don't have to be perfect here. Just as I am, turning up, sharing my story and providing invitations to others to turn up as they are is probably one of the courageous things that we can do. So thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me in this little ludic space. I can see that John is a dolphin. We've got still some plants on show here as well. Thank you so much for showing up this morning as well. And it truly is one of those things that does take guts and bravery. But in all of the times, and I tracked that I did probably close to about 400 Zoom meetings last year, every time I chose to bring some of that absurdity, and every time I chose to be more and more bothered with how people feel when they turn up, it always ended in an experience that was more profound than any other for people online. Jessamy, I'll kick back over to you.